Okay, so in this one I wanted to basically look at cloud foundations and looking at setting up a Redis cluster for scalability and high availability. So if I go into the hands-on here in cloud foundations, I can sort of see there's a setting up Redis cluster for scalability and high availability here. So basically it's using Amazon ElastiCache. So it sort of says in this tutorial you'll learn how to create and configure a Redis cluster with ElastiCache for Redis version 7.0 with TLS encryption enabled. So basically, you know, I've gone through this today and I was kind of having a look and I was actually looking at this on how this would actually fit together. So I just kind of felt it was missing a little bit of kind of more, in-depth information of what I was really kind of looking for. Now, the tutorial itself is quite good, but you may kind of run into one or two little kind of stumbling blocks. So what I kind of did was in the notes, I also kind of went over to this one. So in the documentation here for Amazon ElastiCache, I went into this about, what is Redis, how it works, choosing an environment, looking at AWS regions availability zones, getting started, with ElastiCache, so how to set it up, you set up your environment, basically creating a cache and read and write data to the cache. So I kind of went through all of this um, today, and long story short was basically I want to explain to you what I kind of did, and when you sort of see this, you sort of say, well, it doesn't actually look that complicated, but there was a few little things that kind of I had to remember that you actually had to enable, and I would like to just kind of pass that information on to to the channel here and to this video to sort of say, it may catch you out as well. Um, so I want to kind of share my kind of learnings for this. So the first thing that I basically did was, you know, I looked at this kind of setting up here, setting up this environment, so sign up for an AWS account. We have an AWS account. Create an administrative user. Now, I didn't do this. I basically created my own, or reused my own administrative user. I would like to kind of experiment about this, much more, right? Because I feel that what I set up, it's a good solution, but it wouldn't be the optimal solution that you'd basically apply into your production environment. So what I'd like to kind of do is I'd kind of spend more time on this when I'd actually have more time. But really what I'd kind of do here is, looking at setting up a user with the correct security groups, correct permissions, all of that kind of sort of stuff, and make sure that it actually still works. But what I kind of did here was I went in and kind of following these two um, these two kind of tutorials here, between the two of those, like reading more, about them, because here, you can also kind of create a cache and everything. I went in and I basically created my Redis cache. So that's the kind of first thing that I actually did. And if I kind of open that Redis cache here, you can sort of see, it's got its name, it's got the engine, it's up to date. There's certain criteria that I kind of created on this, and basically when the cluster basically became available to me, you can see its status is available. It takes about 6 to 8 minutes maybe for the status to become available, but when it becomes available, basically you get this configuration endpoint, and this is really the configuration endpoint that you're basically looking to connect to from your instance. So I kind of went through all of that. Um, I went to security. I put this into the default um, VPC. So I put this into the default VPC today just for actually kind of testing. You know, I created kind of some subnets, and the subnets weren't kind of working too well. So I kind of went back to kind of the default, and made sure that the security groups here, for example, the security group is basically in the default is the default security group that I was basically using. So I kind of saw, there was quite a few people that had spoken about, making sure that your VPC that you basically create this Redis in is in your default VPC, and then the security group that you basically added is also the default. That kind of, makes sure that everything is accessible from in the default VPC. Now, one thing that you would have to really kind of spend some time on this. And again, we're learning for an exam, so I'm not standing this up for a production environment. Standing it up for staging or production environment would be far different than using the default VPC or security group, for example. But basically, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to kind of make sure that I remember what actually Redis was, and obviously you'd kind of go back to your documentation here about what is ElastiCache for Redis and why would you use ElastiCache basically for Redis, which is the in-memory database and cache. So I kind of went through all of that, and basically at the end of all of this, looking through here, so there's quite a few kind of screenshots here. I wouldn't say that these screenshots are, again, are really up to date. They didn't seem to be, really reflective of what, AWS was kind of showing here, because this is a much more modern way to kind of do things. But basically, I wanted to kind of make sure that, so for my ElastiCache, it was available, up and running. You can sort of see there's the engine version, there's a description, so easily created demo cluster. From the security group, I went into my kind of security group. I found my security group, the same one that ElastiCache will basically be using. Went in here, and I just make sure this was something that I just really kind of had to make sure that from the security group here that I've created here, I basically had to create the inbound rules here to allow SSH and to allow those kind of ports for Redis, like 6380 and 6379. I had to allow those ports. Now here, the source, I'm kind of allowing all IPs to connect over into my Redis. You again wouldn't be doing that, but basically, it's just quick demonstration purposes, literally for the video. So you can sort of see, in the end, I basically had like four inbound rules, basically for my security group. So I had to kind of update my security group in the default again. Ideally, you'd want to create your own security group with your own users, assign those permissions, and then allow that security group only to access your Redis cache. But basically, once I'd kind of done that as well, and that those kind of inbound rules, they weren't really specified here. They weren't kind of really kind of clear on what you really kind of had to do here. I mean, I know there's some information here about selecting your security group, but I think it would have been nicer if it had been a bit more kind of clearer. So definitely, this sort of one here just definitely had much more clear instructions. But basically, what I kind of did then was once I kind of had my Redis cache up and running, my security group, which would basically allow me access into the security group, I needed something to access it. So what I did then was basically I stood up this new box here called my AWS test box. You can sort of see it's running. It's just a quick kind of small little tiny box in availability zone of US West, EU West in Ireland, region of Ireland. And basically what I did was I sort of said, from that kind of box here, I just made sure that that this was also in the default VPC, to make sure that this box would be able to connect over to it, and made sure that it was basically using the exact same security group as the Redis cache, and that's kind of critically important because you don't want to kind of waste time. But basically, once I could actually sort of see that instance, I could go in here, I could connect here, and my instance would open up. And what I'd have to do then really is, I've put these into the kind of notes here. What I'd actually have to do then is, install a C compiler here, install Redis, make sure that all of this actually works. So you can sort of see here, I've got like, change directory here, and I can kind of paste that in here. And then, if I go back to my Redis here, you can sort of see the cache name here. Here was the configuration endpoint. So here was the configuration endpoint. So just kind of in the notes here, what you can sort of see is I ran this, so this command, basically, to basically pull on the Redis CLI, and the host is that exact same configuration endpoint that I basically listed just here. So I then had to kind of specify the port, and those notes. That's why I'm sort of saying that these notes here just had a kind of better way of kind of showing you how to actually kind of do all of that kind of sort of stuff. With the rules, and download the Redis and all that kind of sort of stuff, and how to create your cache and how to connect to your cache. But from here, I could sort of see that kind of, my instance was running here. Now, one thing I want to kind of show on this is also if I run this command now, you can sort of see that, what did I do here? Let me just check something here. So if I go back to this, okay, so I just kind of had a kind of quick look there. What I basically did was I copied in a $sign here, which I shouldn't have done. That just kind of prefixed my command here. There's no meant to be no $sign here. Basically, all you do is you actually copy in this command here. That's actually in your notes. So I'm going to just sort of say run the following command. And again, I mean, I update these notes to just kind of help others because it's purely just for helping others. But basically, all you'd actually have to do is you'd have to change directory into that. So I can actually get rid of that. You can just change directory into that and then just run the following command. And one thing you sort of see the port here is separated. So, because here you could sort of see that the first kind of hands-on notes, were actually telling me to do it this way, but this never worked. This actually never worked for me. So I think they've kind of changed it over to this way here. But basically, if I kind of go now to my, Redis cluster, so I'm actually in my Redis cluster now, and if I say ping, you can see Pong, so Pong comes back basically sort of saying that, you're obviously, in your Redis cluster, and, there's a few little things that basically sort of said, you can pass kind of information, like you can write information to it. So this is showing you how to kind of connect over to your cache endpoint, stuff like that. But basically, you can sort of see that the Redis cluster here, it's working. I think if I can sort of see history here, actually, sorry, of course, Redis. So if I sort of say history here, I'm just looking to sort of see if I do 50 history. Let's see if I say this, yeah. So you can sort of see here, if I go back into I'm going to put these into the notes as well. So just sort of to set data in Redis. I can kind of do this as well. I can just sort of say set. So here I can sort of say set a hello. So this is just a thing in Redis basically, but basically if I do that, I can sort of say set a hello. Then I can sort of say get a. So I can sort of say, let me see what I did here. Set a hello. Let me see. Okay, so what I have to actually do, of course, is go back into my Redis cluster here, of course, and sort of say set A, and you can sort of see it comes up with like key value pair that you want to actually sort of set. So I want to sort of say hello, and then I can sort of say get A, and that returns me hello. So I've actually sort of set a hello and get a, and that returns me back a hello. So that's like just your kind of key value pair. That's basically a is associated with hello, and then you could kind of query that database. But long story short, you obviously have to be logged into the Redis box to allow that to actually happen. So that's my kind of experience of it. Again, I kind of started off with these kind of notes here, you know, which is the kind of the hands-on tutorial, but I ended up kind of sort of going over to this one as well because there wasn't enough information about what I was actually looking for um, in this one. So I mean, you could kind of try this yourself and just sort of see if you can kind of get to that point where I've kind of gotten to that sort of says you can actually get something back from your Redis cluster. Um, there's a huge amount involved to Redis, but basically, for exam wise, you'd have to kind of obviously just make sure that you understand, um, Redis itself. One thing I want to kind of do, in some next round of videos is start looking at the AWS command line, because I think a lot of this kind of can be command line. I would be much more used to the command line. So I think that would kind of um, when you're kind of creating like create serverless cache, right? So you'll sort of see there's a UI for that on how to actually do that, but you can actually kind of specify this all through the kind of command line. So definitely would um, recommend also kind of trying that way as well, and sort of seeing it just takes a little bit of time, but obviously kind of for scripting wise it just kind of works out much better if you can kind of get used to starting to look at the command line as well. So um, that's Redis cache and ElastiCache, and I'll see you in the next one.